The laughter started softly, like a careless breeze, but it grew sharper with every passing second, slicing through the warm air of the restaurant. Plates clinked, glasses shimmered under golden lights, and in the middle of it all sat an old man who seemed invisible to everyone except those who mocked him. His clothes were worn, his hands trembled slightly as he held a menu he could barely read, and his eyes carried a quiet sadness that told a lifetime of untold stories. No one knew yet that before this night was over, the truth would fall so hard that the entire restaurant would be left in stunned silence. Before we go any further, if you believe in kindness and second chances, take a moment to like this video, comment your thoughts, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps stories like this reach hearts that need them the most. The old man had walked into the restaurant slowly, each step measured, as if he was apologizing to the floor for existing. It was a place filled with polished marble, soft music, and people dressed in confidence, the kind of restaurant where success sat comfortably at every table. As he moved between neatly arranged chairs, conversations paused just long enough for curious eyes to judge him. Some noticed his shoes, scuffed and tired. Others noticed the way he leaned slightly forward, as though the weight of years pressed constantly on his back. A few young men at a nearby table exchanged amused looks, already forming their verdict without knowing a single thing about him. He chose a table near the corner, away from the windows and far from the laughter. The chair creaked under his careful movement, and he folded his coat beside him with surprising neatness. His fingers lingered on the fabric, smoothing invisible wrinkles, as if this small act gave him dignity. Around him, plates of expensive food arrived, and the scent of spices and butter filled the air. His stomach tightened, not only with hunger, but with a familiar fear that had followed him for years, the fear of being unwelcome. The mocking began subtly, a whisper here, a stifled laugh there. Someone mimicked the way he walked. Someone else joked about whether he could even afford a glass of water. The old man heard it all. His ears were old, but his heart was painfully sharp. He lowered his gaze to the table, staring at the patterns in the wood, reminding himself to breathe, reminding himself that he had survived worse things than cruel laughter. The waiter approached, hesitation visible in his steps. He looked at the old man, then at the other tables, as if deciding where his loyalty should lie. The old man ordered simply, his voice soft but steady, choosing the cheapest item on the menu. When the waiter walked away, the laughter returned, louder now, less careful. People felt safe mocking someone who seemed powerless, someone who didn't look like he belonged. As the minutes passed, the restaurant continued its rhythm. Forks scraped plates, glasses were refilled, life moved on for everyone else. But for the old man, each second stretched heavy and long. His hands rested on the table, veins raised like fragile branches. These were hands that had once been strong, hands that had built things, fixed things, held people together. No one here could see that. All they saw was age, poverty, and weakness. What they didn't know was that this man had spent his entire life giving. He had worked through storms and scorching heat. He had sacrificed sleep, comfort, and health to make sure others were safe. He had missed birthdays and anniversaries because duty called louder than personal joy. He had once worn a uniform that commanded respect. But time has a cruel way of erasing titles, and when age strips away strength, the world often forgets what a person once meant. The food arrived quietly. The old man thanked the waiter with a nod, his eyes briefly meeting the young man's. There was no anger in them, only tired gratitude. He ate slowly, carefully, savoring each bite as if it were rare. Across the room, the mocking group watched him exaggeratedly chew, bursting into laughter again. One of them stood up for a moment, pretending to limp, drawing cheers from his friends. The laughter echoed, sharp and careless. Something shifted then, not in the old man, but in the air itself. A woman at another table frowned. A father pulled his child a little closer. A few people began to feel the discomfort of watching cruelty without reason. Still, no one spoke. Silence is easier when it costs nothing. The old man finished his meal and reached into his coat pocket. His fingers paused, feeling the edges of folded bills. He counted them twice, slowly, his lips pressing together. This meal meant something to him. It wasn't luxury. It was a reminder that he still existed, that he could still sit among people, even if they didn't want him there. He placed the money neatly on the table, along with a small tip, more than he could afford. That was when the truth arrived. The restaurant manager stepped out from behind the counter, his face pale, his posture suddenly rigid. His eyes were locked on the old man. For a moment, no one noticed. Then the manager walked quickly across the room, ignoring the laughter, ignoring the curious stares. He stopped at the old man's table and did something no one expected. He bowed his head slightly, a gesture of deep respect that froze the room in place. The laughter died instantly. The manager's voice, though calm, carried through the silence. He spoke about a man who had once saved his father's life during a terrible accident, a man who had worked as a rescue officer for decades, pulling strangers from danger, often at the cost of his own safety, a man whose name was engraved on a plaque somewhere in the city, honoring his service. Though time had worn the shine from it, that man was sitting right there in the corner, mocked for simply growing old. The room seemed to shrink, faces flushed, smiles vanished. The young men who had laughed shifted uncomfortably in their seats, suddenly aware of how small they were. The old man looked up slowly, confusion flickering across his face. He hadn't expected recognition. He hadn't wanted it. He had just wanted a quiet meal. The manager continued, explaining how this man had lost his family years ago, how he lived alone now, how life after service hadn't been kind. He spoke not with pity, but with gratitude, with honor, with truth. Every word hit the restaurant like a wave. People who had judged him moments ago now avoided his gaze. Some felt shame burn in their chests. Others felt tears sting their eyes. The old man's hands trembled again, this time not from weakness, but from emotion he had long buried. He tried to stand, embarrassed by the attention, but the manager gently stopped him, insisting that tonight, the meal was on the house. Something beautiful happened then. Applause began, hesitant at first, then strong, filling the space where laughter once lived. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was respectful, honest, the kind of applause that says, "We see you now." The young men who had mocked him sat frozen. One of them lowered his head, his face red with regret. Another stared at the table, unable to meet anyone's eyes. The truth had hit them harder than any punishment could. They had laughed at a hero without knowing it. Worse, they had laughed at a human being who deserved dignity. The old man nodded slowly, his eyes wet but proud. He didn't smile widely. He didn't raise his hands. He simply accepted the moment, the way someone accepts sunlight after a long winter. For the first time that night, he looked like he belonged. As he prepared to leave, people stood aside to make room for him. A woman pressed her hand to her chest. A man whispered an apology that barely reached his ears. The manager walked him to the door, thanking him again, not as a favor, but as a debt long overdue. When the door closed behind him, the restaurant felt different, quieter, heavier. People returned to their meals, but the taste had changed. Conversations were softer now, reflective. The laughter didn't return. Stories like this remind us how quickly we judge, how easily we forget that every person carries a past we cannot see. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone, and subscribe to the channel to support more meaningful stories like this. Before the ending, I want to ask you something special. Please comment one word that describes how this story made you feel. Your words matter more than you know. That old man walked home under the quiet night sky, his steps still slow, but his heart lighter than it had been in years. He didn't gain wealth that night. He didn't regain his youth, but he gained something just as powerful: recognition, respect, proof that kindness, even when delayed, still arrives. And maybe, just maybe, the people who laughed that night would never laugh so carelessly again, because the truth has a way of teaching lessons that last a lifetime.